With respect to former President Trump, there's some question about whether or not it's a bullet or shrapnel that that hit his ear. So it's conceivable. Although, as I sit here right now, I don't know whether that bullet, in addition to causing the grazing, could have also landed somewhere else.
So that was Christopher Wray, the FBI director, former President Trump lashing out at him for that statement. We do know that the FBI put out their statement of their investigation. It's ongoing, but they said definitively the shooting was an attempted assassination of President Trump. Now, Wray also getting pushback from former White House physician and current Texas Congressman Ronny Jackson, who attended the former president after the shooting. And Jackson writes this: I completely concur with the initial assessment and treatment provided by the doctors and nurses at Butler Memorial Hospital on the day of the shooting. There's absolutely no evidence that it was anything other than a bullet. Director Wray is wrong and inappropriate to suggest anything else. Texas Congressman Ronny Jackson joins me now on the phone. Congressman, welcome, and you are a doctor as well, to 3 former United States presidents. What do you make of the fact, there were many things that the FBI director said, well, we really can't say, that's still under investigation. But on this, he was specific. He said, well, we don't know if it was a shrapnel or if it was a bullet. It seems to me that, shrapnel is part of the bullet before any bullet breaks apart. I'm not sure that this is really that important a distinction when they have said unequivocally that this was an assassination attempt and bullets were flying everywhere.
Right, Martha, I think it's completely inappropriate, as I said, for the FBI director, someone in his position, to make that kind of statement, certainly at this stage of the game. He's the person that's going to be overseeing the investigation into the assassination attempt. And quite honestly, I think that his statements were politically motivated. I think that the establishment in general in D.C., the D.C. establishment, and I will include the FBI director in that category, I think that they are completely threatened by what's going on right now. President Trump is an American icon, and he is so to a lot of people that didn't consider him that before this happened. They saw our president, former president, rise up after the assassination attempt, after being shot in the head, essentially, covered in blood, and shake his fist in defiance. And there are just thousands and thousands of people out there right now that admired what they saw from President Trump when this happened, and people that, they're going to be inclined to vote for him now because they see him as a strong leader. And I think that threatens a lot of people in D.C. And I think, possibly the director of the FBI is among those. And I think that this was a politically motivated statement, and I just think it's inappropriate, and I said to call it out.
Yeah. That we certainly don't want, we've all seen what's happened in the past few years, but we definitely should live in a country where we don't have to deal with that from the director of the FBI. Now, the New York Times did their own investigation of the audio of the whizzing by the former president and current candidate's ear. They tracked the bullets through the audio analysis and a trajectory analysis. They say the model and the trajectory analysis shows that the bullet traveled in a straight line from the gunman to the bleachers, clipping Mr. Trump on its path. This suggests the bullet was not deflected by first striking an object that would have then sprayed Mr. Trump with debris. So the New York Times seems to agree with you.
Absolutely. Martha, I looked at the wound. I actually reviewed the medical records from the hospital as well. And, the physicians that treated the president immediately after the shooting, they mentioned gunshot wound to the ear multiple times. And the discharge diagnosis was gunshot wound to the right ear. So they were convinced that this was a gunshot wound. And, as was I. I think I was convinced when I saw it on TV, like most Americans. I watched this happen in real time. But examining the wound, it's very typical of a gunshot wound. I've seen lots of gunshot wounds. I was a combat physician in Iraq, and I've seen, and I saw them in the emergency department during my training and during my time as an ER doctor. But there's a tract that goes that's hollowed out, a semicircular tract that took off the top part of his ear that's completely consistent with the track of the bullet. And I will say that there was a lot of soft tissue damage, like swelling and edema, swelling of the ear that was associated with that. And that's also very typical, and it's a hallmark of being shot with a high caliber weapon like that, is that the surrounding tissue is also damaged to some extent, and will swell and stuff. And so everything about this injury is consistent with a bullet passing through the top of his ear, and that's what happened. And I think that people just need to move on. I don't think President Trump, anybody else on his team, needs to even play this game anymore. They're trying to distract from what's going on.
I mean, it was a clear assassination attempt by, the FBI made that clear. One thing I think, you heard maybe Lawrence O'Donnell's on his show saying, that suggesting there's some kind of conspiracy or cover up here, saying, why haven't we seen the hospital report? So to those who say, better than to hear from Ronny Jackson, even given all of your extensive experience on the battlefield dealing with injuries as well as in emergency rooms, and you say yourself you're his former physician, would it be better, more direct, to hear directly from the hospital so everyone can see their report, and from the current physician, so that we don't have to go down this road?
Well, possibly, but the report's going to say exactly what I told you, and I don't think it's going to stop the speculation. People are still going to be like, well, maybe, they're going to just try to discredit the physicians at the hospital, just like they try to discredit me. And like I said, I think that from the Trump standpoint, from President Trump and his team standpoint, I think that they need to just ignore this stuff at this point, because all it does is add fuel to the fire. And if you start releasing the medical records and stuff, in my personal opinion, you're giving in to what the left's trying to do here. The whole world saw the former president, almost die that day, and I think that like you said, the FBI is admitting that this was an assassination attempt. It's time to move on. The president almost died, but thank God he didn't.
Yeah, it was a tragic, horrific day, and he did rise up in the face of all of that and pump his fist to the crowd. And it was a very dramatic moment that could have ended very differently. And I think you're right. I think the former president, everybody should probably let the investigation carry out, and we'll take it from there. But I do think if the hospital puts out the report, it would just help to do that. But maybe you're right. Maybe it won't. Ronny Jackson, Congressman, thank you very much.
Click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You won't get it anywhere else.